Good evening, everybody. My name is Christina with Atlantic Institute, and we have with us here tonight Dr. Bruce Handel. He is with Clemson University, and he is going to be speaking to us on the 2022 Rebounding COVID Economy, Better, Worse, or the Same. So Dr. Bruce Handel is a professor from Clemson, but he is also a distinguished oh my gosh, I said it right before, Mercatus Center Adjunct Professor of Economics at George Mason University. He specializes in public choice, regulation, and free market environmentalism. He was also the executive director of the Federal Trade Commission and senior economist on the President's Council on Wage and Price Sustainability, on price stability. So if we can go ahead and Dr. Yandel, if you'd like to introduce yourself
Sure.
as well.
Good. Thanks very much, Christina. Delighted to have a conversation this evening on the economy. And, as you mentioned, the things that I like to follow and try to specialize in, the big thing that I try to understand right now is our economy. These are either very challenging times we live in, or you could say they are strange, or you could say it's weird. But in any case, you and I have been experiencing a time with our economy unlike any period in our economic history. And so we are talking about an economy that has gone through a very strange period in just the last 3 years. Now, I refer to it as a COVID economy, primarily because our economy has been affected by COVID, by the contagious disease, lots of people killed, many people damaged. It has been affected by COVID, and it has also been stimulated by COVID like nothing we have ever experienced before. And so we have an economy that was severely damaged and then stimulated with massive amounts of funds. And it was like a rocket that took off from a crippled stand. And now, in a way, our economy, I would say, is finding its way back to normal, not finding its way back to where we were, but to a normal economy. And so the question, the year we are in, and maybe next year, will we experience something better than 2021, about the same, or worse? We can answer that question right up front. This year and next year will not be as strong as the 2021 economy, because the 2021 economy was literally a rocket taking off. We had unprecedented growth in real in 2021, 5.7%. And our long run average growth over many years is 3.1. So what we have now is an economy that is going to be running at less than 4 right now as we speak, and weaker than that in 2023. And so it's a rebounding economy. Now let's move forward. In order to appreciate what it means for an economy to shut down, in order to understand our economy today, we have to get a good picture of what this economy went through when it was shut down. We have never deliberately shut down a full national economy for practically every sector, just closed everything. And so I'm giving you a few indications. The unemployment rate rose from 4.4% in March of 2020 to 14.7% in April. And it was not back to 10 until August that year. Then I'm giving you some numbers on real GDP, how it fell 4.8, but then it fell more than 30% the next quarter. That was the big shutdown. Thinking about people flying and traveling, March the 12th, 1.8 million people passed through TSA. That was the week before the shutdown. A week later, the number fell to 620,000. The week after that, it was 200,000, and then fewer than 100,000, all in a matter of weeks. Just to give you a comparison, on February 16th, 1.6 million came through our airport. So we're not quite back to where we were, but we are getting there. Then on restaurants, the shutdown came fast and quick. So basically every restaurant practically was operating normally, according to Open Table. And then in a very short time, the number of open seats and reservations that fell to 14% from the year before. Then it was down 30, then it was down 99%. And just to give you a comparison, last week, the data for the United States shows that we were down less than 10. And so we need to appreciate the massive shutdown, how quick it was, how deep it was, and then to think about this rebounding economy affected by COVID and by the trillions of printed dollars that got showered on us by our government. Those printed dollars stimulated a massive increase in demand. People, many of them were at home, many of them were furloughed, laid off, couldn't work, and now you're at home and money starts falling into your checking account from the federal government. Well, what are you going to do with it? Can't go shopping, just a few places, can't go out for dinner, all the restaurants are closed, can't travel. So here you've got all this money. Well, a lot of people said, hey, this is a great time to redo the kitchen. And so there's a massive increase in demand for dishwashers and all kinds of appliances. Other people said, hey, let's add a deck onto the house. And so we rushed down to Lowe's and get a truckload of 2x4s. Some people said, hey, this is a good time to get rid of that old pickup truck and get a later model. We got money in the bank. So there was a huge increase in demand for vehicles. That then put stress on supply chains. And so in the last few months, we've heard over and over again how the problem that we face as a nation are supply chain problems. I would say the problem that we're dealing with is huge demand problems given the supply chains that were already there. And it's more than just a play on words. And so as this thing continued, then we had an economy that was what I called a Frankenstein economy, in as much as pieces had been put together by policymakers in order to avoid the tragedies associated with COVID. And so we have an artificial economy with a big heart, strong legs, moving fast, but there's some things you can't do, there are things you can't buy, and so people concentrate on what they can buy. What I'm showing you here is real GDP growth, and you can see those two bars that zig and zag so large. If you were to look at quarterly real GDP growth since the beginning of time, you would not see anything like this. A swing that's more than 30% down, and the very next quarter, more than 30% up. These massive changes then are occurring quickly and affecting our economy, and the effects are still present today. Here are the numbers that I referred to. For 2021, 5.7%, that's the number that has now become final. Then I'm giving you some estimates for the year we are in. This is for the International Monetary Fund, the Philadelphia Fed, Wall Street Journal, and Wells Fargo. So you can see the range of estimates for this year, with the smallest one, 3.3%, the largest 4%. Then 2023, continuing to slow. And then I'm showing you the US average since 1948, so that you can get a feel for the rebounding economy, but then an economy that is going to be slowed by Fed action, if not by other means. Along the way, we'll talk a little bit about the threat that is currently there in Ukraine with Russia. And so now it's commonplace. Everywhere we look, we see a sign like this one that was at Duncan: the whole world is short-staffed. Be kind to those that have showed up. So COVID, inability to get people, short staff gets to be the excuse for practically everything when we as consumers are out there trying to shop. For small businesses, this is last week's survey of small businesses in America. The number one issue is not labor quantity, it's labor quality. It's not just getting people, it's getting people who can do something, who can work. And then inflation is now the second largest concern for small businesses, and you can see the others. But what about all that helicopter money? We had $3 trillion dumped on our economy in 3 to 4 installments. Not everybody got money, but almost everybody did. And so here it came falling into your checking account. Well, what about all that money? What I'm showing you here are total demand deposits for the entire US economy for the years January 2019 for the period through November of 2021. This is money in the bank, folks. And you can see what the numbers look like before the takeoff. Normally, we would have about 1.6, $1.4 trillion in all of our bank accounts. By the end of November, we had $4 trillion sitting in checking accounts. And there you can see how it bounced in with the different programs. And then here was the final one in March with this current administration. More money showing up in the banks, but with only limited places to spend it. Now, if it all had started being spent quickly, we would have had a huge amount of money chasing a limited number of goods, and that is the perfect recipe for inflation. So we went shopping. The red line that you are looking at there is vehicle sales, light vehicle sales. That's autos and trucks. We're looking at percentage change year over year. And there, right about May of 2021, there was a 115% increase, 115% increase year over year. And new car prices jumped 14%, used cars jumped 47%. The blue line that you're looking at is all retail sales. And so you're seeing a sudden mountain that emerges. There's money in the bank. Let's go shopping. And if you visit some auto dealers today, in some cases, you won't see one new automobile sitting on the lot. They're selling them faster than they can make them. And then there were those who bought the new washing machines and the dishwashers and said, hey, this is the time to re-equip the kitchen. And now I'm showing you retail sales growth for electronics and appliance stores, a 140% increase on a year-over-year basis. And so now, for the first time in my memory, there's a waiting list. If you want to get a new dishwasher, we'll be happy to put your name on the list. And it's not because of supply chain problems as much as it is the huge increase in spending as we consumers took that money in the bank. Then we know the picture up here on the upper left-hand corner is a picture of the Los Angeles port. We've all seen that picture. Hundreds of ships waiting to be unloaded. And when we saw those things on the evening news, the commentator says, we don't know what's wrong out there at the LA port. They just don't seem to be able to unload the ships anymore. And now they're saying, oh, it's because we don't have enough truck drivers, or we don't have enough this. Not a single commentator that I have heard indicated there was a 100% increase in imports to the United States from China on a year-over-year basis. A 100% increase in shipments. Yeah. Well, no ports. You wouldn't expect ports to be capable of handling that much of an increase in a short period of time. And so you can see the explosion, and now you can see the decline. So we should begin to feel some relief there. The auto producer said, well, gee whiz, everybody wants to buy a new pickup truck or a new car or a new something. Let's try to see if we can't satisfy the demand. And so again, you see another mountain that forms. There's a 300% increase in production. And then people said, oh, but now we're running out of microchips. What's wrong with the microchip people? What's wrong with them? We used them all up. with one huge spurt in demand like nothing that had ever been experienced before. And so now we are in this rebound economy with things catching up and a sense getting to a new normal, not the one that we left behind. Now, construction was not listed as an essential industry, you might remember. The government identified things that were essential, like liquor stores, they were essential, and drugstores and grocery stores, and things that were not essential, like churches and synagogues and places of worship. They were not considered essential. They got shut down, but construction was considered essential. And so that then meant there's this huge sector where people can go shopping. And so what I'm showing you here is year-over-year growth in new single-family residences, surge after surge that has continued, but we also know what happened to the average price of homes sold. There it is up in the left-hand corner. The average price for new homes sold is up almost 19% during this period. And so now I'm giving you an inkling of some of the fuel that is feeding into inflation. One other piece of this, since we couldn't fly and since the hotels were closed, there were a lot of people said, well, honey, this is a good time to load up the car and we'll go to a national park or a state park and we'll camp out and picnic. So the number of miles driven exploded. Well, what did that mean? Oh, we had to stop and fill up the SUV along the way. Well, so there was a huge increase in demand for gasoline. And then all of a sudden we see the prices of gasoline shooting up and say, price gougers, OPEC, all those people over there who are trying to take our money. What's wrong with this world? Right when I wanted to get gasoline, they raised the prices. And so again, that surge in demand begins to explain part of what we experienced, never all of it. Producer price indices for important construction materials are being shown here on this slide. The top line you're looking at there is for steel products, for metal commodities that are used in construction. Notice that there was a 240% increase in prices. Before we got started, Christina and I were talking about what she and I experienced when we go shopping for groceries. We've seen some price increases, Christina, but we haven't seen any 240% increases in prices. But people who are in the construction business have. And some of these other price increases down below don't look tame by comparison, but some of those price increases are up 40%, 80%. The construction sector has done well trying to keep up. But as we go forward, we get inflation. Now, I want you to walk through this chart a little more slowly with me. The blue line is growth in demand deposits. We talked about total deposits. The blue line that you're seeing is growth in demand deposits for a period 2019 through 2022 January. So you see they're almost in the middle, long about 2021 January. You see the explosion take place as the checks come into our bank accounts. The red line is growth in the consumer price index. Now notice there's a lag. The money comes into our bank accounts, but we don't go out and spend it instantly. We have to think a little bit. And so we leave some of it. And after a while, we say, well, this is the time to trade a car, or let's redo the kitchen. There's a lag almost 8 months. If you, in your mind, shifted that blue line to the right until those curves begin to touch, you would then be building a forecast for what future inflation is going to look like. And if you do that in your mind, in your imagination, you will see that we will be experiencing about 5% or 6% inflation probably for the next 12 months. And then it will start tapering down because the thing that is fueling it, money in the bank, is getting spent and used, and the fuel behind inflation will be gone. Now, here's just a puzzle that I wanted to leave with you. The number of $100 bills circulating in our economy is used by economists as a proxy for the size of the illegal underground economy. The world of crime and illegal activities is fueled with $100 bills. Now notice, there has been an explosion in the number of $100 bills circulating in our economy in association with what I have been calling the COVID economy. Now, does that mean there's been an explosion in crime? I don't know, because we don't have the data yet. Does it mean that there is an explosion in other kinds of activities, people just trying to avoid paying taxes, and they're doing things with cash to avoid taxes? I don't know. I'll leave it to your imagination to think about what this means, because it is a proxy for illegal and underground activities. Well, now, what about our neighborhoods? How do we fit into this picture? Let's talk about home territory here. We live in a part of the country where there are no big cities of great consequence, which is to our advantage now. People are fleeing the large cities and they're going to medium-sized ones, and they're finding things that are very attractive, which previously they had not explored so much before. And so what can we say about that? The satellite image of the United States gives us some hints as to how we might do in the current period. As you look down on the map, where you see the brightest lights and the biggest clusters, you are observing the largest, most flourishing economies in the United States. The number one economy is right there, Boston, New York. That's the largest regional economy in the United States. The number two economy is Chicago, Pittsburgh. Number three, right there, where we are, Charlotte. That's the third largest regional economy in the United States. Not only is it large, it is flourishing. It is healthy. People are voting with their feet, coming to this economy. To find another economy almost this size, you have to go to Southern California. And if you look out there at Southern California, you see an economy that's almost the same size as Charlotte. And so we are talking about people coming to our territory, and maybe you've seen some like this out on I-85, loaded up, coming our way, and the driver says, "Paul, where should we head?" And Paul says, "Let's wheel toward Greenville." And I'm going to tell them if they're going to come our way, they've got to decorate their vehicle and make it look right for the neighborhood. And so we have a huge influx in population coming our way. Not many people realize it. If you stared at data the way I do, it's my hobby. But if you looked at data the way I do, this would not be a surprise to you. But for most people, it's a surprise for them to learn that the South had more people as a region than any other region starting in 1960. In 1960, the South was the most populous region of the United States. And you can see where that number stands now. And if you look at the slope of that curve, it'll give you a hint of the relative growth rate. The steeper the line, the faster the growth. And so we have two high growth regions, the West and the South, and those trends are continuing. And we have two slow growth regions that are diminishing in relative size as we come forward. The most recent data from United Van Lines on movement of household goods shows South Carolina to be the third most popular destination in America. It was number 2 last year. And if you look, I've put in boldface the southern states that tend to dominate the moving in. And then you can look over to the right and you can see the states which ranked highest for people moving out, with New Jersey being number 1, Illinois number 2, and so forth. And so there's a grand reshuffle of people favoring our region of the United States. I'm showing you population growth annual averages from 2010 to 2019, 10 years of data here. And the blue states are the states that are showing positive, strong positive growth. The darker brown are negative, the lighter tan are weak. And so you can see the draining of people in terms of relative growth rates for the nation by looking at this map. It's even more pronounced when we look at employment growth. Much more dark tan as you look at weakness in employment growth for major states across the US. And so we can say, well, I'm either lucky or smart or whatever, but let's just say we're smart to have chosen to live in a region of the country that has a lot of positive force behind it in terms of prosperity. I mentioned at the outset that we have experienced something that has not been experienced before when we looked at COVID and the shutdown and the startup, the resumption of activity. And this chart is what I call coming back from the dead. Every month, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia produces an outline map of the United States based on current coincident economic indicators. The staff at the bank gather data on housing starts, new employment, business startups, turn it into an index called a coincident economic indicator, and they build a map for the United States, and they color the states depending on their relative strength. That's what the map looked like for May of 2020. The entire nation was negative. What you are looking at there is something I hope you will never see again from the Philadelphia Fed. You're looking at a dead economy. Every state had negative readings. It was the states were dead. That's what the map looked like in September. That's what happened between May and September. The economy had been shut down. It gets started back up. And now all of those blue and bluish green colors, those are positive. And you see one negative in the picture, New Mexico. All the rest now are blooming again. And now as we go forward, there's February. Notice the colors are not quite as vivid, but there's not a brown one now. And so we're getting a spread of, might call it normal coincident indicators. A lot of the effects of the money that came into the bank has already been absorbed when we get to February of 2021. There's August. Once again, the colors are a little dimmer, but more uniform. Here's November. Michigan has turned yellow. There's weakness showing up there in the auto industry. And here's the most recent map. That's for December of 2021. And if you want to pick South Carolina, you can see that South Carolina has had a healthy color throughout the period once the economy became alive again. Something else that's rather powerful. Growth in new businesses. The data for December just passed. New businesses started in America, 418,000 started that month. a huge increase, a 54% increase over the previous December. And you can see South Carolina's color down there is very healthy. That's the monthly data for the nation. There has been an explosion of new businesses. Now, there can be lots of reasons for that. In some cases, in fact, the restaurateurs there in Greenville, Sobey was saying when he was interviewed on 60 Minutes, are you having a hard time getting your people to come back to your restaurant? He says they won't come back. And they said, is it because they don't like to pay or the working? Oh, no, they've started their own businesses. They're not going to come back. They're in business for themselves. And so that's part of it. Another piece of it has to do with the payday protection plans. There was $1 trillion given away by the federal government to firms in order to protect paydays. Now, if you started a new business, you might be able to get in that line and get some of that money. And so there's some of that in this data. In other words, it's a mixed bag, but what we know is that there's a kind of renaissance that has started. There's South Carolina's data. And we're looking at, for South Carolina, up to 10,000 new businesses per month, starting in our state. And you can see what the line looked like previously, along about 3,000 businesses per month. And that's Greenville. We don't get monthly data, we get annual data, so it's not quite as vivid, but it's a similar picture. So there's some optimistic people out there, people who say this is the time to start a new business. When we look at the unemployment numbers, and that's what this paragraph is telling you, it might be helpful to realize that these new business starts are adding about employment for about 5 million people per year. And that is a large part of the unemployed labor force that may not be counted well because of the business startups. Well, what about debt and the future? This is something that I found recently that helped me to comprehend the size of $1 trillion. 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. And so when someone says this is going to cost us $1 billion or maybe $1 trillion, be aware that there is a vast, vast difference between those numbers. And so in 2021, the federal government raised $4 trillion in revenue and spent 6.8 trillion. And the federal debt jumped to 29 trillion. The point, we are building a lot of debt that somebody is going to have to pay off or pay the interest on the debt. Now, it's easy to be discouraged if you have a family member, if you've lost a family member to COVID, as I have, or if you know people who've been sick, or if you know people whose businesses have been disrupted, or you listen to the evening news tonight and you hear that there may be an invasion in East Ukraine, and it's kind of hard to know what that might mean. When you hear this news of various sorts and think about COVID and what we have all lived through, it's easy to be pessimistic. And my mother loved me a lot when I was little, and so I have always tended to be the optimistic person in the room if there was going to be one, but I was getting pessimistic, and I decided I better see if I could get myself in a better mood. And I decided to reread Voltaire's Candide. It's a little book that many of us read when we were in high school. In case you have forgotten Candide, it's a story about a small number of people, a band of buddies traveling and being tortured, encountering every known disaster that anybody could invent. Suffocations almost, amputations almost, all kinds of punishments. And after all of these ordeals, they finally make it home. And when they get home, after all they've gone through, Candide's friends said, What are we going to do now? And Candide said, it's time to tend our gardens. And so that's the message I want to leave with you and suggest to you that you and I are not going to be able to do much about inflation other than live with it. You and I are not going to be able to do much about any potential war in Ukraine and the disruptions that might come from it. There's not a lot that we can do about the federal government's debt, but we can tend our garden. And sometimes it's literally tending a garden. There are some people who have a green thumb or want to, and they're out with their children tending their garden, something they can do something about. Other people get a lot of satisfaction and happiness out of volunteering in community activities, and that's their garden. And so if that's your bag, tend your garden. For some people, it's their work. They love their work. They can't wait to get there in the morning and hate to leave in the evening and even go in on Sunday afternoon because they love it so much. If your work is your garden, try to do it better than you've ever done it before. And for some people, it's just getting out with the family, enjoying what we will have in a few weeks, a spring here in a beautiful part of the country, and that's their garden. And so I would conclude with that thought: find your garden and tend it, and it'll make this world a better place. Thank you for listening to me. We have time for some questions, Christina, and I'll do my best to answer them. Or if there's a topic that I have not brushed up against that you would like for me to, I'll do my best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Yandel. If you could do me a favor and just go ahead and stop your screen share.
Okay.
And then we can come back to all of us in a group setting. There we go. And so then we can come back to all of us in a group setting. And we did have two questions.
Okay.
Mustafa was asking, and I will say, Mustafa, if you would like to, are you on? Yes, you are here. Would you like to go ahead and ask your question? Because we're all here together in on one screen, so there's not a lot of us. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute.
We have a newborn here, can make some noise, but I'll do my best. Hi, Dr. Yandel. Nice seeing you again.
And
you
wonderful.
Remember me from Clemson? How are you doing?
Good to see you.
Oh, well, yeah, it's just like holding the baby now. Okay, so my question was, your data is promising for future. It's not the best, but, or not the way it was before the COVID. So I was wondering if things could have been different or better if we had a different government. If we had someone else here in DC, things could be different, you think? Or any ideas that you think could have been done, but this government has done properly, I would say?
Yes. Thank you for your question. The question is, would different, I'm going to paraphrase your question by saying, would different government policies make a difference in terms of future prosperity
for everything?
Right. So you get different policies with different administrations. And so what do we see when we look at policy decisions that have been made that have a negative impact on GDP growth and prosperity? The big one, as far as I'm concerned, has to do with trade. We placed a lot of tariffs on goods coming into our country, and we have placed limitations on goods where we did not have tariffs. That is, we have gone to a system of quotas. This was the case during the Trump administration. The policies have continued during the Biden administration. And so we have cut off for ourselves the flow of goods from Canada, in some cases, from Europe with steel and metal, from Canada with dairy products, from China with consumer products, and so forth. So we have limited the access to goods from the world through tariffs and quotas, and that has made it more costly for consumers to get those goods otherwise. Now, there are reasons for doing that. We all know that is a political reason to do that. Is the politician may have made promises to particular groups and said, if you vote for me, I'm going to close off some of that foreign competition that's giving you a hard time. Okay, that's the number one category. Trade that has closed off expansions of movement of goods. We have closed off the movement of people. The human resource is the most valuable resource of all of those. It's called the ultimate resource. We've made it harder for people to come into our country, or who might be here on a temporary basis to stay in our country. That has cut down on labor growth. And when we talk about those signs in front of practically every business that anybody ventures into today, we are hiring help wanted. One of the reasons that it is hard to find help has to do with the limitations our government has imposed on the movement of people into our country. And again, we understand there are political reasons for doing that. But that's the second category. The third would be regulation. Just the broad category. We have imposed the heaviest and most costly form of environmental regulations on machinery, on construction, and on consumer products. It's not that we regulate, it's how we choose to regulate. We have chosen to regulate using command and control regulation, which says, I, the government, will tell you how to design your product. And if you design it properly, I will give you a permit to produce and sell the product. And generally speaking, when the government specifies a design requirement, it is some existing firm's design that they require on everybody else. And so if you happen to be that lucky firm, the regulation doesn't cost you anything because that's the way you were doing it anyhow. And so you're able to raise your competitors' costs by way of regulation and to cartelize markets. And so I've mentioned three things, three policy areas: regulation, trade, and excuse me, and the movement of people. What kind of difference might that make? I would suggest to you, we're talking about maybe a percentage, 1% of GDP growth. Instead of going at 2.5 to 3%, we would be going to 3.5 to 4%, depending on a revision of those policies. But thanks for your question.
Thank you very much for that answer. I appreciate I enjoy your hobby. It's just quite an interesting hobby. I like all the slides.
Okay.
With all of I find it very interesting to think about the $100 bills and like, does that correlate to an increase in like dirty money, I guess you could say.
Yep. Yep.
You know, I thought that's very interesting. We had another question. And let me ask the question in here that Walter was asking, and then we can go to you. Look like you're gonna say something.
Yeah.
So
About $100 bills, yes.
Good.
Okay, so Walter was asking, what will war in the Ukraine do to the U.S. economy and to the U.S. stock market?
I'm sorry, I'm missing the very first part.
Yeah. What will war in the Ukraine?
Okay, good. Let's talk about it, because I hardly brushed up against that issue, but it's, as they say, it's the elephant it's the elephant in the room tonight, because it is big. It's a large issue. It could be a devastating issue for lots of people. Perhaps the economic effects will be mild relative to the human effects, but we may feel the economic effects. The economic effects transmitted to the U.S. economy will come by way of energy prices. That's number one. And second, by a diminution in the growth of the European economies that are hit hard by higher cost energy. Their growth will slow, and that will slow down our exports to our trading partners in Europe. But the main issue, as I see it, would be rising energy costs and prices for American consumers and for the American economy. Russia produces 10% of the world's petroleum. They are huge. Russia provides 40% of Europe's coal, oil, and natural gas. They are huge. They are a huge player. Now, there's always a second best and a third best. And so it's not a matter of they closed off the valve and now we don't have any. What happens is they close the valve and now the US, for example, will be shipping a lot of liquefied natural gas to make up for the reductions perhaps from Russia, but it'll cost more. And so what we will see is an adjustment taking place. I would expect that, well, we just in the last 2 days, we've seen the spot price for crude oil break $100. Now, the contract prices are a little less than that, 95, 96, 94, but it has broken 100. I expect that we will see $100 as the contract price for Brent crude oil in the next few days, where a week ago it was 90, 92. At the gasoline pump for the nation, the average price for gasoline yesterday for the nation was $3.53 a gallon. It varies a lot depending on state and local taxes, but that's the average. I would expect that we would see $4. Now, my expectation, what I'm saying to you, is based on the expectation that something bad is going to happen and that we will see it transmitted to us by way of energy prices. I don't think that there is anything that could be transmitted to the American economy that would be severe enough to cause us to experience a recession. But there is a kicker in that as well. As we all know, the Federal Reserve is under the gun, so to speak, because they have put forward the notion until recently that the inflation that we were experiencing was just passing through. It was transitory. Not to worry, it's going to go away. Well, it didn't go away. It got worse, as we know. And so the most recent data showed a 7% increase in CPI for an annual inflation rate. And now the Fed has changed its tune and said, we will be kicking up interest rates starting in March, maybe 6, 8, 10 times over this year and next year. We're going to slow the economy and we're going to try to avoid a recession as we do so in order to get the inflation down. But now we have another force that has entered, rising costs of energy and gasoline. That's a very different problem from inflation. This is one price that goes up, not all prices going up. And so I hope the Fed will be, and they will be, there are super people there. I hope that they will be aware as they now hit the brakes, that they're hitting the brakes for an economy that may be being hit simultaneously by problems coming from Ukraine, Russia. And that would suggest that they might hit the brake a little lightly, lighter than they would have before, to avoid a recession. Now, I've attempted to address your question. I would like to be able to do a better job in responding to what might happen as a result of that. But right now, it's probably the best I can do.
Thank you. I know this the other day, everybody was posting in their community group and social media how their electric bills doubled.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh boy, this is not going to turn out well.
No, it's bad enough.
This is, my electric bill is bad enough, but for it to double is, and for it to get higher. Let me get MB first here, and then we'll get to Keith.
Okay. Yes, back to the $100 bill issue. My window on the world is small, but I've noticed that Bank of America only gives tens, 20s, and $100 bills at their ATMs.
Okay.
And in our community, stores have put up signs saying, we do not take any more $100 bills.
Yeah, yeah.
In order to get a 50, I have to walk into the bank, and then they don't have any. I got all 7 that the main branch in Spartanburg had a few weeks ago. I wonder if that is a large problem or a problem in our section of South Carolina.
I don't know, and I expect that that the Bank of America and every other bank is responding to Fed and comptroller of currency rules with respect to what they will let us have and not let us have. But here's the thing that was surprising to me. In a way, it is speaking to your question, but not directly about the 50s and so forth. There are more $100 bills circulating than for any other currency. There are more $100 bills circulating than $1 bills or $5 bills.
Wow.
Incredible.
Or 10s or 50s. You see, that's part of the puzzle.
Mhm.
There is a vast underground economy out there. It's big. I mean, probably larger than we can imagine. And maybe you've encountered it a little bit. Perhaps you've needed to get a tree sawed down in your yard after it fell, and the fellow who came said, well, here's my price if you pay me cash, but here's my price if you give me a check. You just hit the underground economy.
Right.
That there's a cash economy out there. I know that the banks do have rules. That is, if you or I were to show up in the lobby of our bank and say, I want to get $50,000 in $100 bills, we would probably be being interviewed by 3 or 4 more people while they call the police. I mean, not literally, but almost, because there are controls on that. But the thing that was amazing to me when I first stumbled into this niche of underground economy proxies for size and saw the data on the $100 bills, I was just amazed that that's the most popular unit, because quite honestly, I can't remember when I've seen one. I did see one. A lady had one the other day at Ingles when she was shopping at the grocery store ahead of me. And I looked over to make sure I got a good glimpse of it. But those things are rare beasts in my world.
She had been to Bank of America. One other question. I know this is not your area, but as you were speaking, talking about the that very large increase in the consumer price index, it seems to me that I recall that I-bonds interest are tied to the CPI.
They are.
That sounds like an excellent place to put your money right now.
They are. And the yield right now is 7.1%.
Wow.
There's a limitation on the amount that a consumer can buy, $10,000, if I recall. And that is being debated right now for the very reason that you are suggesting.
Right.
Is that any one of us looking for something safer and secure with respect to inflation would find those I-bonds to be very attractive. But there is a limitation on how much we can buy.
That is pretty low. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Akif, go ahead. I think you had your hand raised before.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Engel, I was so excited. Like as a student, I took my pen and a notebook, and I have written down a lot of data. So thank you so much for this excellent presentation and very updated all the data you have shared. I have several questions. Let me just start with the tariffs and quota ones that you mentioned about the Trump's administration. They put the tariff and quotas, and the Biden administration they continued on that one. And in the same time, you mentioned about our imports increased 100% from China.
Yes.
So would you consider, under the normal circumstances, economists, they would not find tariffs and quotas efficient because that's creating the dead weight loss in the economy. So, but given the percentage of increase in our import from China, and I'm sure that that's kind of true for the other countries as well, not in the same rate. So then would you consider then in terms of the efficiency, because if there was no tariffs and quota, that would have maybe been worse. Would that be correct?
It would
And
be.
if it's correct, would that really be more pressure on our inflation? So in that case, is that reasonable to keep in place rather than to really lift them? This is the first question. If you want to address this one, then I can actually, come up with other questions.
Sure. No, the I think we start. I think perhaps a way to speak to your question is to put it in the simplest possible terms. People who are free, who are not imposing costs on anyone, we might say, should be allowed to buy and sell goods and services with any other free person they choose, without asking, what is your nationality, and are you on the other side of an imaginary line which says you're not in my country? That is, two free people who want to do business with each other, one might argue, should be allowed to do so because they know more about what is best for them than anybody else can possibly know. If you say yes, but there's some circumstances where they may be imposing some costs because there are people who work in a factory who, if they got the orders for the goods, would get to keep their jobs. Then we begin to ask, well, do you wish to burden ordinary people who are shopping in order to protect a selected group of people? And so now you have dual citizenship in the country that we're talking about. You have a protected group and a group that is carrying the burden of paying for their protection. Now, the real world is a whole lot more interesting and complicated than the simple example that I have just used, but I think the simple example does give us a basis for thinking about the analytics. There's as you've intimated, there is far more going on with concerns about China than efficiency considerations with respect to free trade. The tariffs and quotas, primarily tariffs that we imposed on Chinese goods, big ones, came about ostensibly because of concerns of protecting intellectual property rights and other matters affecting American firms doing business in China, building plants in China, and so forth. But even there, I would say be cautious because so much of what is done collectively through the political process in any country is driven by special interest groups who are able to organize and influence politicians to favor them. And so that's part of our real world too. So even when someone gives us a really good speech about intellectual property rights and thefts of patents, and now we've got to wrap those people on the knuckles by making their goods more expensive here, I would suggest dig deeper, listen more carefully, try to get a more persuasive explanation. I'm going to, I guess I'll sort of go down swinging for free trade, even in the most severe circumstances. Even if it's a country that abuses our property rights. If there are business who, in spite of that, want to build a plant like Tesla, want to build an automobile plant in that country that abuses all kinds of property rights, allegedly, and steals patents. If there are Americans who want to build a plant in that country and bear the risk, It's my feeling, let's encourage them and see what we can learn. But freedom is so fragile that we need to speak up for it sometimes just for its own sake, I would suggest. But thank you for a sandspur of a question.
And the second question I have is, Dr. Randall, about the new businesses.
Yes.
The data you presented is very interesting in terms of the increase overall 54%
Yes.
over a year. Like the new businesses, do you think that will account some of the unemployment in terms of, you gave an example, right? Because there is a labor shortage in the market everywhere. You see now hiring sign.
Yes.
And we see in the labor force, there's about, I think, 4 million decrease. I don't know exact. I think that's likely about 4 million less people are in the labor force.
Right.
But then I would assume there's how much correlation that you find between labor force the reduction translate into the new businesses. But I assume those new businesses, they are small businesses, and they will be, I wonder if counted as part of the labor force or not, because this is another, like the question. So does it explain some of the labor shortage? What's the percentage?
I would say it explains just a piece of it. And I would say also, with respect to your question about correlation or some statistical relationship, that it would be very hard to get the data cornered so that you would feel good about a statistical model. But nonetheless, I think the startup of businesses is so large, and each one does involve at least one person. And the number is so large that I would suggest it does have to have an impact on the larger number of people no longer in the labor force. But there are other factors that are very important there that have not been identified rigorously, but I would say somewhat rigorously. There's a category of people who are not in the labor force because they are at home taking care of their children or their grandchildren, because they cannot depend on the school being open or the school bus running. So closed schools, unpredictable schools, have imposed a pretty heavy burden on a large number of people who previously were in the workforce, and the burden is disproportionately heavy on women and on grandparents. So there's an older component. There's about a 3 to 4 million exit from the labor force of people who are 55 years old and older, who decided, I think I'll just go ahead and retire. A good chunk of those are babysitting because of closed schools, for example. Then there is a significant number who are afraid of COVID. And they're saying, I'm just going to wait. I don't want to take the risk. We are learning also, because of the increased scarcity of labor, we are learning that we should be examining our attitudes and ideas about the minimum educational requirements to get to take a particular job. There are industries now that had just sort of, as a knee-jerk thing, say, you got to have a college degree. Fill out the form, check the box, got a college degree, you will continue to be considered. If you don't have a college degree, sorry. There are a lot of businesses who are now asking a hard question. Is a college degree really necessary? Or maybe we ought to start looking at people who don't quite have a college degree. There are a large number of people who are kicked out of the labor force now because of drug use. That is being re-examined. In a world where marijuana is being legalized in maybe 20 states to one degree or another, there are people asking, maybe I should change my thoughts about whether or not anyone should be employable if they use drugs. So the scarcity is causing us to re-examine things. I did want to mention, though, Aki, that with respect to the business application data, and I hope you'll be interested in it. I hope the data might be helpful to you in your work. Go to the Bureau of Census. They have a website. The data the charts that I've shown, I copied from their website. Go to the Bureau of Census, type in Bureau of Census business applications, put that in your address bar and go. Then you will find there are Excel files that identify the kinds of businesses by categories as to whether they are retail or some other category. Then they have what they call high propensity business starts, where certain questions have been answered in a way that enables the Bureau of Census to forecast that this will probably be a surviving business. So it is a rich data set, might be helpful to you and to others in building your own enterprise.
I think the last question I have, Dr. Engel, is about inflation. So inflation is definitely the major concern, but it's interesting based on the survey that you presented. This is the number two like concern, not the number one. So the number one is labor quality.
That's right.
So has lumber, but this kind of not my, like a maybe part of the B part of my question. So is the labor quality has always been a major, it has been always be a concern. Is this the first time has been number one concern? That's the first question, if you know about the previous surveys. Also, the main question for inflation, and I see definitely the correlation between the helicopter money and the inflation, and you say it's like about 8 months of lagging that
Right.
you presented, but evidently, like in the coming months, that's going to be reduced, and
Right.
so even this year might be about 5-6% of inflation expected, right? The forecast. But do you expect a recession? Because that's one of the concern after the Fed is going to make some adjustments in the interest rates. That's one of the fear is, with all these uncertainties, a very, unprecedented ups and downs. Do you feel that we might really head to a recession by next year, like 2023, especially given the war possibility? It's and also the kind of really decline of the helicopter money.
Yeah. The let me answer your questions backwards to forward. Prospects of a recession, I would say, are small, and they would depend on Fed behavior. And what we're talking about with the Fed is they are dealing with very crude tools. It's not a smartphone where you can push some buttons or turn some dials to change economic activity. They have just a few tools available to them. The overnight interest rate is what they can control directly. And if they pick the wrong numbers or impose those changes too quickly, then we could find ourselves slipping into a recession. It would be driven primarily by the construction industry. So when we look at the long-term interest rates, which pick up inflation expectations, and they're already going up, that is, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage number is rising rather smartly, that will reverberate through construction, and that is a booming sector, and that will deliver the slowdown and maybe a recession. But right now, I don't think so. But I did introduce the second risk factor, and that is Russia, Ukraine, and higher energy costs now reverberating through this effort to do something about inflation. With respect to the National Federation of Independent Businesses survey response that I was shown on the screen, where labor quality was their number one concern, I don't know. I haven't looked at previous surveys over a time series to speak to your question Has it been that high before? I don't know, but I do know this. Quality of labor has been a high problem area for a long, long time in this region. I had a wonderful lunch one day sitting next to the personnel human resources manager for one of the largest chemical manufacturing plants in South Carolina, down in the Low Country. And I asked him, how many people do you have to consider, interview, bring in for a job prospect to get one? He said 100 to get one.
Wow.
And I said, well, I said, is it because of the necessary skills to be able to comprehend what goes on in your plant? He said, oh, no, not at all. We can teach that. He says, the skill that is most scarce is the skill of getting up every morning and going to work and doing it every day for a week and doing it for a month and getting a paycheck. He says, that's the skill that we are having to teach in order to be able to fill our needs for personnel. That is, there are people who have not had the wonderful experience of observing people who work regularly. And so they have not developed work habits. That's what he was referring to. So I think it is an old issue, and one that I hope a lot of people will work on.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You see that where it starts in high school,
Yeah,
when they start not getting up and not coming to class and then drop out. And
that
that's where you see that starts.
bed felt so good.
Yeah. We've talked. Do we have anybody else that would like to ask a question? I just thought I would throw that out there to anybody else here. Thank you, MB, and thank you, Akif, for your questions.
Well, Christine, it's been wonderful being with you and seeing some faces I haven't seen in a long time and talking about the economy. And I sent you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. And of course, anybody who can't sleep at night who wants to look at these again, it'll knock you out. So
That wants to take a look at them, yes. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed looking at them the other day. I said, I don't know what I'm looking at, but I know that this is going to be a great discussion because I know I need somebody to interpret this all for me.
So my last word will be, please tend your garden.
I will say, in this past year or two, we have a mechanic shop over here. We have not slowed down.
Okay.
And with the work I do, I've been doing this virtually, so I have not slowed down.
Yeah.
And you know, we've watched the prices of wood go up and wood go down.
Yeah.
And we've watched the prices of metal because we've been building a shop. And we actually have managed to do it the old-fashioned way with all of the older guys around here out in the country that know who's got metal or who's got wood. And we go get it and we go find free stuff and free supplies. And we've done a pretty good job. One of the things we were going to do was replace a vehicle. And we decided this is not the time or season to do that with the cost of used vehicles.
Yeah.
You know, so, and we have chickens and we have planted a garden this last year. We grew our own stuff and we had chickens and eggs and.
Oh, buddy, you are a literal gardener.
Yes, when you said tend to your garden, I was like, yes, we have been doing that.
Good for you. All right.
Dr. Randall, maybe before we close, then I just want to kind of share one of my appreciation with the way that you end your presentations. Last time when we had the presentation, you mentioned about a book that was kind of asked from you by Clemson to put in the library. And then like you told about, maybe that was going to be a complicated, sophisticated, like a very book, but you picked the little engine that could.
That's right.
That you recommended, and I had not read that one, honestly. And after that, I ordered from Amazon. I read, and I had my kids read it.
Oh, very good. I grew up with that book.
Well, be sure and read it to your children.
I did it. In fact, it was very interesting.
Yeah, read it aloud. Read it out loud.
Yeah,
It's
So-
that's the book that teaches you to get out of bed in the morning.
there you go. It's
That'd be what's missing in the
that's right. You,
So
you
now-
can't see it, but I probably have 14 or 15 different copies of Little Engine That Could on my shelves in here, different editions and so forth, because I just think that book is magical.
but kind of my impression that the way that you always want to come with a conclusion with a positive thing to give the
Yes.
hope, that's
Yeah.
that's very good. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dr.
Good being
Young.
with you.
Good to see you.
too.
Yeah, my
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a wonderful night.